So hello and a warm welcome to those who joined us for previous talks and to anyone joining us for the first time. So I'm Terry O'Sullivan and I'm a volunteer with the steering group of Elders for Earth, which is a section of SHEP Earth Aware, which is actually a branch of the Community and Development Project SHEP. This evening's talk is the 9th in a monthly series of talks by individuals from different faith traditions and different backgrounds, which we hope will inspire and encourage us to find ways of awakening and nurturing in ourselves and in one another, love for the earth, awe at the mystery of the universe and of the web of life on earth, and compassion for those who are suffering. We as part of that web are interconnected and can support one another in that working together towards a more just and sustainable way of life. To do this work, though, we need to cultivate inner resources that can enable us to not only live fully in the present, but also to face the future without despair. As elders, we can also stand in solidarity with the younger generation who are deeply concerned about the earth and the future they are facing, and offer whatever wisdom and perspective we have harvested over the years. So tonight we are delighted to welcome Reverend Deborah Parsons, a Totnes team vicar in the Anglican tradition, rural area dean and interfaith advisor. So Interfaith Advisor is a role Deborah took on in 2019. As Interfaith Advisor, Deborah works with people of other faiths and from a range of different traditions within the Church of England. Deborah said for her, the role was about recognizing diversity and thinking about how to build good relationships with people and recognizing God, the divine spirit, in one another. She adds that she has a particular interest in inner spirituality, how we look at another person and recognize that as fellow human beings, we are all part of one family. Deborah is also keenly interested in ecology, which arose through her role as collaborator for River Dart Wild Church and through her association with the Transition Town movement, a movement of communities coming together to reimagine and rebuild our world, including working for sustainability, low carbon, and a socially just future. So in tonight's talk, Deborah will speak from a personal perspective about some of the work she has been involved with in the unique context of her parish in Totnes, UK, a journey of the heart. So it is my great pleasure to welcome Deborah to speak to us tonight. Over to you, Deborah.
Thank you very much, Terry, for that very generous introduction. I'm just going to share my screen with you. So let's just pause as we connect to that most authentic part of ourselves, to each other from wherever we're connecting, and to the breath that unites us all. You might want to mute yourself and join in with this prayer. You are the love of each living creature, O God. You are the warmth of the rising sun. You are the whiteness of the moon at night. You are the life of the growing earth. You are the strength of the waves of the sea. Speak to me this night, O God. Speak to me your truth. Dwell with me this night, O God. Dwell with me in love. You are above me, O God. You are beneath. You are in air. You are in earth. You are beside me. You are within. O God of heaven, you have made your home on earth, in the broken body of creation. kindle within me a love for you in all things. So let's just take a moment of silence. When Neil Duker, and I never know how to pronounce Neil's name, asked whether I would consider doing a talk, and Frank got in touch with me, I explained that I'm not an expert, I'm simply a fellow traveller, a traveller on the way. And so what I share with you this evening is not, as Terry said, an Anglican point of view per se. It's simply a talk by somebody who happens to be an Anglican from birth. But as we've probably all found in our spiritual journeys, our worldviews that we've inherited are identities that perhaps we grow into and grow through, and our identity can be shaped by them, but it's perhaps not all of who we are or all of who we become. And I think in my own journey of spirituality, I found that my identity goes beyond labels. And so this evening is really a personal view of my own inner journey and connection with the environment and with creation. And this evening's reflection is not a finished product, it's simply a snapshot of where I am in this moment at this time. Not necessarily where I will be, but I just offer it to you with humility and in love. I think it reminds me of those words from T.S. Eliot in that poem East Coker. We must be still and still moving into another intensity for a further union, a deeper communion. Through the dark, cold and empty desolation, the wave cry, the wind cry, the vast waters of the petrel and the porpoise, in my end is my beginning. So I want to share a little of my journey of the heart, of connecting spirituality and the earth, and of my increasing awareness of the interconnectedness of all creation. So I live and minister in the town of Totnes and surrounding villages. And some of you may have been to Totnes or have heard of it. Some of you may have no knowledge of it at all. It's a medieval town that's situated in the southwest of England, and it's nestled on the edge of the River Dart. There's about 8,000 people who live in Totnes, although we've had a lot of new build in recent years, so that the town is growing actually and increasing. And it gained a reputation for being the first transition town. And a group of people came together and asked the question, what would it be like if we could reduce our dependency on oil? And people began to have those conversations at a local level. And they recognised that in the transition town movement, it's not a one size fits all. And I think the Transition Town movement, over 43 countries have set up their own local initiatives. And so it's very much a collective rather than an individual endeavour. And it really involves commitment and ingenuity and creativity and generous hearts. So part of the aim of the transition movement has been to look through at how local projects can encompass every aspect of our lives. So it may involve looking through at what we can do in our communities regarding transport. And I know in Totnes we have an electric bike sharing scheme where you can hire out bikes to use. We also have eco car share and designated places within the town where we can share eco cars. And we also have our local currency, the Totnes pound. And this was really to try to encourage people to buy and to shop locally and to support local businesses rather than large conglomerations. And although that's been more challenging, I think, through COVID time, I think the intention was to try to encourage people to think about living sustainably and also living simply. And I think part of that has been about exploring different types of power. We recently set up hydroelectric power that would power the local secondary school. And so it was a wonderful way of engaging with young people and with the town to enable them to realise that things like this can really make a difference. And we hope that also has an impact on the younger generation to feel that they're a part of this movement. And as part of Totnes, we have a garden trail, and you may have this in the communities of which you're a part. But there's been a real initiative locally with a lot of volunteers to really transform our outdoor places and to encourage people to spend time outdoors and to connect again. And part of that vision has been to encourage those, particularly of primary school age, to learn how to grow their own vegetables and to be able to name plants and trees. And if you walk around Totnes, probably not on a day like today when it's been raining, but you will often find people will write in chalk on the pavements if there are particular plants or flowers or even weeds that are growing, so that people who are passing by going to school can begin to learn the names of plants. And we have lots of incredible edible planters planted locally in the gardens and by the river, so that people can walk past and they can see, how courgettes grow and how herbs grow, and can be encouraged to pick the herbs and use them in cooking and so on. And we also have forest schools. We have a Steiner school in Dartington and forest schools in all our primary schools particularly. One that I'm involved in Dartington has its own outdoor altar. And on the altar it's got leaves for the different forest families. So rather than having names of things, that they're all named, the houses, after leaves. And so it's a lovely way of them recognising the shape of the leaves and what the tree looks like and understanding a little of its properties. And we have community gardens as well. But what I want to particularly speak about this evening is my experience of being a collaborator with Riverdart Wild Church. And I wasn't the founder of this movement. It's been founded by Reverend Sam Wernham, who trained initially as an interfaith minister and more recently was an ordinand with the Anglican Church. And she's done extremely wonderful work in really trying to encourage people to connect and to connect with nature and to have Sabbath moments where people are more aware and more present and have contemplative spaces to be able to connect with nature. And she's very much taken the idea of pilgrimage, that notion of wandering, actually doing a physical journey because we're incarnational beings, but also having those opportunities to wander, to be curious and to bring curiosity to our understanding of the world. I think as children are amazingly curious, and they will notice they'll notice cobwebs, they'll notice the spider or the ladybird. And sometimes, we tend to lose that curiosity as we grow older. But the Wild Church is an opportunity to see the sacredness of everything. And when in the Exeter Diocese, we've been really trying to engage with the pilgrimage movement and encouraging people in the practice of pilgrimage. Some of that has been about physical pilgrimages. We've recently had a new Archangel's Way commissioned, which goes from St Michael's in Brentor to St Michael the Archangel in Chagford. And we had the St Boniface Way from Crediton Parish Church to Exeter Cathedral. And very recently, the Archbishop of Canterbury opened the Patterson Way after Bishop John Patterson. And we have a link with the Melanesian brothers, and it's been a way of really walking some of the land where he grew up and was associated with. But my association has been particularly with the Sacred Waters Way, which is a different sort of pilgrimage. And one of the things that we've been doing is walking from the source down to the estuary each month, taking a different section of the River Dart, and encouraging people to explore the spirituality of the river from its source to its sea. And I'll speak a little bit more about that later this evening. But my first introduction to Wild Church was on a series about remarkable trees. And I can remember my first encounter. It was on a day in winter. It was a pretty wet and a pretty cold day, and I was invited to go and join the Wild Church. And I have to say, I experienced deep resistance. I didn't particularly want to spend a day out in the wet and the cold. And I thought, well, I've just got to go and see what this is like. And we travelled out to a place on the edge of Dartmoor. And the shape of the Wild Church sessions is very much based on the Eucharist. So it's about gathering and engaging and sharing and blessing. And Sam's inspiration for this came from a revelation about a story in the Gospel of John, a post-resurrection story, when the disciples are utterly dejected. They think that Jesus has died and is never coming back again, and they are fishing at night and they catch nothing, and they're absolutely despondent because even the profession, the trade they had before their encounter with Christ now isn't bearing fruit for them. And suddenly they're told to cast out their nets on the other side of the boat. And when they do that, they catch this abundance of fish. And then they haul it in, and the cosmic Christ cooks this breakfast on the beach for them. And so there's something about the Wild Church movement which really encourages inclusivity, that everybody's welcome at the table. But it also offers hospitality, and part of the meetings is about just sharing food together, breaking bread together. And it's also about just meeting people where they are. And so we tend to gather and just have an opportunity for people to state where they are, how they are in that particular moment, to really be present to what is, without any judgment, without any sort of conditioning, just to be able to be. And then there's an opportunity to engage, and this can take different forms. As I said, my first experience was in this silver birch grove on the edge of Dartmoor on this cold winter's day. And I was absolutely struck when we were given an opportunity simply to engage with the trees and to see how they spoke to us. To notice that the birch trees were all unpeeling in various states, and it was an extraordinary to see so many silver birch trees together in various states of undress. And it was at a time in the year when the birch trees swell as they're drawing up that water from the ground, and they actually sort of weep. And one of our speakers on that day was telling us about how you can tap that birch water, but you do it in a very responsible way. So just as you wouldn't give a blood transfusion to a child unless you were sort of very poorly, you wouldn't take the birch water from a tree unless it was healthy. And we just learned a little bit about the properties of birch trees, and seeing the bark just unpeeling was for me like that journey of the heart, of thinking, what are the layers in myself that need to unravel? And what happens if, like the birch tree, I stand naked just before my Creator and just see what I'm called to be? And it was an incredibly moving and profound experience, and I think made me really aware that I was one, that actually the water that was going through the birch trees was the water that was going through me, that there was the water that was going through all of creation. It was a profound moment. And I think there's something about standing perhaps in a church and looking at a holly bush, as we did in one of our churches, and thinking, well, what parts of me are prickly? When can I be a little spiky? And to be able to reflect on that in new ways. And I think often in the Bible we can see so many stories that encourage us to be present and to pay attention. There are so many arable parables. We're told to consider the lilies of the field, the mustard seed that spreads like wild mint, to consider the wheat and the tares, or the sower and the seed, yeast, salt, light, bread, water, fig trees, sheep and shepherds' vineyards. I think perhaps one of the gifts of the lockdown, the first lockdown, was in that beautiful weather to really slow down and to begin to notice and to pay attention. And I know as I spoke to people of that experience, it was very profound for many people, because actually they hadn't noticed, and life had been so busy and so fast-paced that they recognised that they had lost touch with who they were. And perhaps one of the advantages of being able to walk through in our localities to explore green lanes has been that incarnational call simply to be present to what is, to pay attention. and to allow nature to speak to us. What if all creation is the hiding place and revelation of God? I can remember one particular retreat I was on when I was encouraged to go out and to explore nature and to ask nature a question and to see what nature gave back to me. And I asked a practical question about a vocational move and somebody I might be working with. And the answer that came back was, as I looked at the diversity of creation, was there's unity in diversity. I wonder whether you've ever asked questions out to the universe and seen what universe has given back to you. I know in the pandemic, when I suddenly realised that we were in a new phase and we would never go back to what was, we could only move forwards. And I sat at the vicarage table and wept. But then I had a revelation, and it was simply the words, I am willow. I am willow. And I felt called to draw down those willow roots and to draw up that living water and to be able to develop branches that could bend and be more flexible, whatever the storms and whatever the weather. And I have to say that revelation has been something that I've gone back to and that has encouraged me and fed me and made me appreciate even more deeply the connection with all of creation. How can we read the big book, the book of nature? In our sessions with the Wild Church, we will often ponder on a story, because so often in religious traditions there can be a tendency for those to be transactional, that we have something to tell you, rather than an opening to an awareness that people already have within them. The kingdom of God is within you. And so I want to just share with you now a story that I was told in that birch grove several years ago that still speaks to me today and still resonates with me. And so you may decide you want to turn off your screens now, if you want to listen, or to shut your eyes. But I just invite you to imagine that you are in a place, in a rural area. There's a simple dwelling, and in that dwelling lives a woman and her daughter. And the daughter tends the sheep. And throughout the year, from the spring right through until the autumn, the young Bathushka takes her flock of sheep to graze near a birch grove. And in her pocket she takes with her a spindle for spinning flax. But actually, what she really enjoys doing is roaming in the woods. Sometimes she'll go and see what new wild flowers have emerged. And occasionally she'll make up a little dance just for the fun of it and twirl about under the trees. And one spring day, a beautiful woman suddenly appeared before her. She had long blonde hair and was dressed in a silky white flowing dress. And she wore a wreath of flowers on her hair. "I see you like to dance," said the woman. "Oh yes," said Bathushka. "I could dance the whole day, but my mother's given me this flax to spin." "Tomorrow's another day," said the woman. "Come, dance with me. I'll teach you some new steps." And so Bathushka joined the lady, and laughing and singing they danced through the trees and out into the field. And so light were their steps that the grass was neither trampled nor bent. And near evening the lady suddenly vanished, as suddenly as she had appeared. And Bathushka gathered up the sheep and she headed homeward. And whether her mother asked her about the spinning, she pretended to have misplaced a spool, and she said nothing about the lady in white. The next day she set out to the birch grove again, and once again the lady in white was there. "Will you dance?" "I can't," she said. "I must do my spinning, or my mother will be very angry with me." "If you will dance with me, I'll help you spin," said the woman in white. So once again she joined the lady, and they danced together throughout the day. And near sunset the beautiful lady smiled. She waved her hands, and lo, like magic, the spool was filled with a fine linen thread. That evening Bathushka's mother was delighted. But still Bathushka said nothing about the lady in white. And then on the third day she went out again, and the lady was waiting for her in the woods. And they danced together as never before, pirouetting and curtsying, skipping and swooping, whirling and laughing, skimming over the ground lightly as the wind. And when the day was over, the lady in white spun the flax again. "You are a fine dancer, Bathushka," she said. "I've so enjoyed myself." And she handed Bathushka a pouch with a mysterious pattern just on the outside of it. And as she handed it to her, she said, "Take good care of this." Bathushka peered inside, and inside she saw some yellow dried birch leaves. She took the pouch and put it in her pocket, gathered up the flock and returned home. She gave her mother the spool of new thread, and this time her mother looked at it more carefully. "Where did you get this from?" she asked. "You didn't spin this yourself, did you?" And Bathushka came clean and told her about the lady in white. The lady with a flowing white dress and the wreath of flowers on her hair. "Why, Bathushka, that was the wild lady of the birch grove. It's very good to meet up with her." "She taught me some wonderful dances," said Bathushka. "And look, she gave me this pretty little pouch filled with old birch leaves." And when Bathushka emptied out the pouch for her mother, her mouth fell open. Inside was not dry birch leaves, but birch leaves of solid gold. I wonder how you connected with that story. What were you drawn to? So let's just have a moment's silence just to reflect on that. And then we're going to go into breakout rooms. Just to have a chat in a smaller group about how you've resonated with that story. I don't know whether within the breakout rooms whether anybody would want to share a little, or just something if they wanted to share with a wider group. There's no need to do that if you don't want to, but if you feel that there's something you'd like to just share to the wider group, then perhaps just raise a hand, which you can do sort of in the toolbar, or visibly, or write something in the chat box. But silence is always a beautiful contribution as well.
I'm wondering, I think some people are waving their hands. I'm thinking maybe Margaret and Maureen,
Yes.
Ruth, I'm not too sure.
I saw Ruth anyway.
Mm.
If anyone wants to speak, they could unmute. Yeah, Ruth's unmuting now. Thanks. Yeah, you can unmute if you want to speak.
Sorry, I wasn't waving my hand.
Okay.
So I'm listening.
I don't know whether Maureen wanted to speak.
No, unfortunately, I was trying to maneuver stuff on the frame. So, yeah.
I might
But
just say
I did love the story. You know, what appealed to me, I suppose, was the unexpected gift of the gold. You know, and the maybe transformation. You know, that listening to our desires, or, you know, being with nature or ourselves or whatever, may bring, you know, the unexpected and the gift, I suppose, you know. So the gold symbolized that for me or something, you know. So it was lovely. Thank you.
Can I just make a comment, Deborah? In our group, we had a conflict between, I suppose, the dance, the freedom of the dance, and the duties that were waiting to be done. So it was about half and half. Two of us were paying more attention to the duty and two to the dance. So it was lovely. We really enjoyed it. Yeah, it's a lovely story. But we had a question about the gold, I suppose. All right, we were coming up with different interpretations for what it meant, and there was a bit of disappointment that maybe you know, something about consumerism or whatever came into it. But maybe there's another meaning to it. Yeah. Thank you. It's lovely.
Thank you. Jane.
Hi. Well, in our group, we talked a bit about how nature is open-handed, and that, you know, we don't actually have to do anything in order to receive from nature, and that was the point of the story. And I think we were more or less agreed about that. And that, you know, how much our society tends to make everything into a transaction, and that how all we need to be really is opening ourselves to nature. Yeah. And yeah, so that was really the gist of what we were saying. And it was really, really nice to actually have a small group and talk within just 3 or 4 people. And we were all one spirit ministers, we discovered. Apart from Cathy Cunningham, who didn't seem to, I'm not sure, she didn't unmute and she didn't take part. So we said hello to her in her absence. I don't know whether she heard us or not.
And I think one of the beauties of using story is that there is no right or wrong answer. And they can work within us. We can hear the same story but hear it differently because it's living. And I think it just helps us to do that sort of journey from the inside out. And I think certainly, you know, you're blessed with so many stories that are stories of transformation or resurrection that are framed in a language that people understand and can connect with, and you'll find your own connections. So just encouraging you to explore and to be playful and to allow it to move you as or respond to it in any way that you want to, whether that's through dancing or through writing or through painting or whatever, through journaling, but just to have that space to engage. Just going to, is there anybody else who wants to speak before I just move on?
Well, Deborah, you mentioned exploring the spirituality of the river, and I think it was something that you were going to come back to. I'm just curious, like, about how you do that, or how that happens.
I'm going to just share a little bit about that now. Yes, yeah. So I'm just going to fast forward a little bit through. So one of the things that we've been doing is to as part of the Wild Church was to work with an organisation looking through at making a charter for the River Dart. And we thought, what would it be like to encourage people to begin to take responsibility for our waterways and for our springs, and that this can't be simply something that's done by the government or by water authorities. It has to be something that's owned by all of us. And I think the Bioregional Learning Centre began to explore this in Totnes, and to think that if we try to take ownership for the river, it's not ours to own, and we can't have legal rights over things. We'd be embroiled in paperwork. But what would it be like if actually we had a moral responsibility to be good stewards of the river that's in our area? And so she set about working with other people to have a community consultation about, you know, what would that look like? What would it be like to actually have moral but not legal rights? And to put together a charter for a particular stretch of the river where you live, and to have a river council that can really begin to look at the issues that arise. And so the pilot scheme for this was a stretch of the River Dart from the Dartington estate through Staverton Weir, and what they did was to consult with people. Around about sort of 1,250 people were involved just in that stretch of river. And they knocked on over 500 doors around the sort of parish, and they worked with the estate team in Dartington, and also, you know, looked at local interest groups, so people who are concerned about biodiversity, and people who were swimmers, and people who were involved in fishing, canoeists, etc. And they also ran some river science training as well. And what they set up with these individual charters for particular sections of the river that are really sort of owned by the community. And what we've actually done as part of the pilgrimage is to take these charters to journey with us along the Dart and to then present it in the different churches that we go to the church boards as custodians of those particular bits, and to try to encourage people to take responsibility and ownership for the river that's in their community. And I don't know, have any of you got any experience of this? Or have any of you ever made your own river charter? So perhaps I'll just very, very briefly just explain the process. So essentially, the first thing that the Bioregional Learning Centre do is to just identify the need that your community has for a river charter. And they simply canvass local opinion and to find out what the local water issues are. And they take those to a community forum, and they begin to sort of actually canvass particular groups. So it may be taking it to climate activist groups, or a community land trust, or to a church group, or parish council, or a neighbourhood plan task group. You know, whatever it is, it's in your area, and that will be different and unique for each of you. And some of the questions that they asked as part of that consultation were, what was it that they really treasured? You know, what do you really treasure about your rivers? You know, is it about having healthy water? Is it about respectful access? Is it about having trees along the bank, or having a wildlife corridor? What about the river's own rights and agency? What about it being a unique or special place, or for drinking water or biodiversity, or a place that's tranquil, or a sort of beauty spot, or for swimming or fishing or canoeing, or that sense of it being the whole source of life, this sort of hydrological cycle. And so we began to sort of have those sort of questions. And then the community sort of had a conversation about their particular part of the river, and local people were really invited to talk about the past and the present and the future of the water and the landscape it's in, and the water wildlife, and to really sort of think about, you know, the history of that place, and to really begin to engage with its story. And I think this is a lovely way as well of just engaging a wide range of people who have a sense of that history, people who might be sort of creative and storytellers, and to really begin to listen and tune in to that history. And then we were encouraged to hold a meeting and to expect there to be some tensions at that sort of public meeting and consultation, so that people could really name their concerns. And it was about then trying to transform those concerns and make them into positives, to make them into assets, because people are able to name what's really precious and matters to them. And then to begin to actually draft out a charter. And the way in which it worked is that there would be people who were appointed as river stewards, and they were trained in citizen science on the River Dart by West Country Rivers Trust. And so they would actually be people who would, if you like, hold some sense of accountability for whether this charter is actually being lived up to, are people really engaging with it, and so on. And to be that sort of sense of that ballast or check. And then to go back in the light of sort of changes and so on, to really sort of just draft the charter, and to have that as something that is owned by the whole community. I don't know, does anybody want to share anything about that, or whether you had any experience of that? I mean, this is very much a pilot project in Totnes, and I think they're hoping that if it gains traction, that moving from legal rights to moral rights might be a wonderful way of engaging people to really take ownership and responsibility for their stretch of the river, that becomes more manageable.
I'd love, Deborah, to hear a little more of the kind of clashes that occurred at the meeting. I'm anticipating that if it were done here with the Lee, that runoff from farms, the nitrogen runoff from farms would be a very big issue.
Absolutely. So it's that sort of thing. It's things about actually who, about runoff and how we engage with that. And one of the things we were looking at in Dartington particularly was actually a glebe project and how church land is used. And one of the things that we were concerned about was that some of the land was being used for commercial gain, really, for monetary gain, rather than to encourage biodiversity. And so we've done quite a lot of work, really, with the Exeter Diocese to ask those challenging questions, and to then begin to work with other organisations like the Apricot Centre to actually farm land sustainably, and to have to work also on better drainage and to look through at runoff to make sure that we're not polluting the areas. And so that's an ongoing conversation at the moment, and I think it's certainly raised the profile. But that's one question for those of you who are involved in your local churches, to begin to ask those sort of questions, just saying actually, how is glebe land being farmed? Is there a way in which we can do that? We were hoping to pilot part of Wild Church to have a permanent base working in partnership with the community and with the Apricot Centre, and to have a strip of land in Dartington that they could then have as a Wild Church community. That's proved very complex, sort of legally, trying to organise that in the time frame that we had, but we're now looking at whether there's another site where we can begin to have that. But I think the outcome of that particular project has been that the Apricot Centre will farm that land in a more environmentally friendly way, and also work to look through at having better drainage and so on there. So there's been a positive outcome, even though we were hoping that there may be more community engagement. Yeah, but I think part of it is about actually not bypassing those difficult conversations, and about really encouraging an openness, because I think things don't happen when people aren't allowed to have a voice, or when there's a set outcome and it's got to look like this. That process was pretty painful process, trying to have those conversations when you're balancing commercialism, viability, sustainability, and all those questions, and trying to find a place of authenticity within that. So I'm not saying they're easy conversations to have, but I think it's about speaking truths, about sometimes asking difficult questions, and about seeing how the Spirit moves through that. And sometimes, we may not always have the outcome that we would want, but actually if it's a step closer to actually begin to think about these sort of questions, then it's a start. And I guess it's these step by step moments, which will be different in every context. Does that help to answer your question a little bit, Frank? And I think this is also, perhaps I might just add, where spiritual practice comes into play, to be able to hold the pain and to be able to hold space well. And I think perhaps part of that is about not engaging in discussion, but simply providing a space where each person can have a voice and be listened to deeply. Any other questions around that?
Thank you, Deborah. I'm really heartened to hear that you have had the difficult conversations and have come out the other side of that. I suppose, where I'm living in a rural area, we have a biodiversity group, and we can feel very overwhelmed by the, by all that we want to kind of save and protect, the waters, the marshes, the woodlands and so on, and hedgerows. And, you know, there's always that sort of tension between looking after ourselves as well. It's very easy to kind of feel burned out and feel like it's just so overwhelming. But I really like that, I suppose, a river, you know, can't be owned, you know, and I'm just wondering, because we often talk about, like, should we kind of introduce some Celtic rituals, you know, around festival times? And I'm just wondering, do you have any rituals associated with the river now?
I mean, what we've done actually is, you know, we collected sometimes, you know, water from there, and we sort of carried water. That whole sense of being water carriers. But at different stages along the dart, we've had different rituals that mean to us. So sometimes it's just been a question of just stopping along the dart. On one particular journey from Ashbrington, no, from Totnes to Ashbrington, we were encouraged simply just to kneel down on the banks of the River Dart and to put our hands into the water and just to allow the river to speak to us. And, you know, what I noticed in that particular exercise was there was parts of the river that was very fast flowing and other parts where it seemed to be very, very still. You know, other parts where you've got some branches or bits of detritus in there and so on. And so it just allowed you to have that conversation, that inner conversation, really, both that inner journey and the outer journey. And as part of part of the wild church, we tended to just share communion, not in bread and wine, but sometimes it might just be often in water, or perhaps if there's a particular herb or something we pass on the way, that would be offered up, and it would be passed around in a bowl that was actually crafted by ex-cons from Channingswood Prison. And one of the most deeply powerful moments was actually in the Dartington orchards, there where we just passed around apple juice, and it was passed around in the bowl, and this is pre-COVID, I have to say. But actually, it was extraordinary to think I was underneath some apple blossom, looking at this apple juice in this apple orchard, and thinking these apples have been crushed for me. And it really made the Eucharist speak to me in a living way and in a powerful way. And thinking about the water that had gone in there, and then, you know, reverently what was left over was poured back into the roots of the tree. So nothing is wasted, a sense of real reverence in all of life and creation. So I think it's about actually how we create rituals that speak to us and to our communities in that moment, which I think have the most impact, often in unexpected ways. And I think it was actually in Dartington when we put in a pollinator in a meadow to try to encourage the bees there, that I suddenly had that profound experience of realising my name Deborah meant bee in Hebrew, and people had always shortened it to Debbie, and I suddenly had this absolute revelation, my goodness me, I'm connected to the bees. And from that moment on, I've insisted that people call me Deborah rather than Debbie, because I suddenly realised that connection with all of creation. So I just think when we open ourselves to nature and to these profound spiritual experiences, we are changed. We're changed by those experiences. Any other questions? I'm aware we're sort of, Jane.
Yeah, I think it's a really inspiring idea, this idea of the River Charter, and I'd love to be a part of something like that happening where I live, where the river Bandon has just been, how would you say it, assaulted, I suppose, so much in the last couple of years because they needed to do works to prevent floods. And so I think, a lot of what you're saying, I find that very inspiring, whether something can happen like that. But yeah, the idea of doing ceremonies maybe to forgiveness.
Yes. I mean, we did actually, I guess, one of the things I did was lead a day's pilgrimage from the Leech Wells in Totnes. And perhaps just, how am I doing for time? We're almost out, are we? Just conscious.
That river.
10 minutes. 10
Okay,
minutes still.
perhaps I'll just show you a little thing, really. Just bear with me. Just if I we have something called the Leech Wells, which you'll see on the right hand side here in Totnes, and they were associated with healing, and people used to say perhaps years ago that people used to walk from the Leech Wells to the church, and so on, and part of this is about really they're very well visited. You'll see just sort of prayer things and things sort of left by it, and people go and gather. And even in the Middle Ages, they had to have wardens to protect this particular area from as early as the 1400s, because people would naturally gather there. And what they realised is that we had 3 springs, and those springs have come down into this garden called the Leechwell Gardens. And so they have 3 springs and 3 pronged path, and it forms a sort of natural spring. And because of that, they've had this sculpture done of a trinity of trinities, to remind people of that whole sense of flow. But I think there are ceremonies. I did a ceremony journeying from the Leech Wells down through the gardens here, down to the River Dart, and then up to a local well which is near where I live on Borton Lane, just getting people to understand and follow the course of the streams and the brooks and the rivers, because I think that's when you can have a profound experience, when you actually literally follow it, as we have been doing on our wild church pilgrimages. And I think this is one piece that I wrote, inspired from filling an urn with some water from Bidwell Brook, and carrying this along the bank. And I'll perhaps just share this with you. She held the pottery urn in both hands, manger-like, as if she was holding something of infinite value. Her fingers traced the pock-marked surface which still held the memory of the hands that had moulded it. The urn was aubergine with hues of peat and metal ore, as if the urn had emerged from the very ground on which she was standing. As the urn was passed to her, she held the gaze of the giver, as their hands cupped hers, a reminder of their oneness with each other and all of creation. She was surprised by the weight of the water-filled urn, which sloshed from side to side in rhythm with her step. Suddenly the import of what she was being asked to do struck her. Source had spoken. "I'm calling you to be a water carrier." Me? Yes, you. She felt the weight of those words. What a privilege, what an honour, what a responsibility. In her plenitude, she was being asked to give water to others. Suddenly she understood. She couldn't hoard the water or keep it for herself or let it stagnate. It could only give life to others if she gave it away. For how else would she be able to draw fresh water? And as she emptied herself, she understood how important it was for her to keep her connection to Source. How important it was for her to search out the water sources. Without this, her urn would soon run dry. She smiled. She realised that in her hand she held the key to the mystery of the universe, the key to the mystery of life in all its abundance and beauty. Water freely given, and freely received. And I think in this journey, as we let go into source, we will just be guided one step at a time. I think sometimes the task before us can seem overwhelming. We can't do everything, but we can each do something. And perhaps just spending time in nature, spending time simply being still and waiting, will be shown what the next step is. And I perhaps just want to leave you perhaps with one final thought. How are we being called to be water carriers? Perhaps. How can we help do our part, play our part? And perhaps I just want to show you one final thing. I'm going to just push on just to show a little thing. And if you want to find out more about how to do a River Dart Charter, then contact the Bioregional Learning Centre, and Isabel Carlisle will be able to let you know that. I'm going to just whiz past some of these things here just to show you something right at the end. Because this is just, we have within Exeter Cathedral at the moment, we have the Museum of the Moon, and we're just encouraging people to really connect with creation and to just understand a little about those rhythms. And thinking of water makes me think about the moon too, the waxing and waning. And so yes, I've just this last week been putting together some prayer stations to encourage people to really engage with that. And we've encouraged people just to come and to lie under the moon, to engage with it, to allow it to speak to them. I think this weekend we're having a silent music under the moon where people can dance and just commune. And we've put together a little solar chapel, lunar chapel to with prayer stations, getting people to think about how they engage with the numinous. But I just thought it's just such an amazing picture of the moon, isn't it? Really, just stunning. Sorry, too far. And I think perhaps when we stand out in the universe, we realise how small we are. But often we can also create our connection and realise a connection with everything. And that in itself can be transformative. So just on that note, let's just pause for a moment and hold all of that. The grace and the grit. May the grace of the love of the stars be mine. May the grace of the love of the winds be mine. May the grace of the love of the waters be mine. In the name of the word of all life. Amen. And perhaps we can say this, perhaps you can mute and say this together. And if you find the word God difficult, then replace it with love or reality or truth, whatever word is right for you.